you don't know who I am, my name is Benjamin Orr. I'm the founder, president, and CEO of the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. We are, as you just heard, we are going to be recording this call. It will not be shared widely, but it will be shared with those of you who RSVP'd. As many of you know, this year has been an exciting year for many reasons. One of those reasons is that the Maryland Center on Economic Policy is celebrating its 10th anniversary. I remember when I started the organization back in 2013, and it was just myself. Now there are 9 or 10 of us, depending on how you count. And the team is doing some amazing work. And so I'm excited to share some of those updates with you today. Our year-long celebration will culminate at our annual policy summit on September 23rd, later this year, at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum in Baltimore. I will mention that there are sponsorship opportunities available, and whether you can sponsor or not, we do hope that you can be there and join us, and we hope you can consider supporting us and keeping the momentum going for the next 10 years and beyond. I also want to mention a couple of staffing changes that you may have not been aware of. Maybe changes is the wrong word, but there are a couple new titles you might see. Callie Shumitz has been elevated to the Vice President of External Relations and is on the call today with us and will help me answer any questions you might have about the session. And our development coordinator, Raquel Contreras, is now our director of development. Another example of how we're growing. This legislative session has been different for several reasons, but primarily because it's the start of a new administration and one that is much more friendly to our priorities. We've been able to work collaboratively with Governor Moore's administration and Comptroller Learman's legislative team on our shared priorities, and are starting to establish positive working relationships with several of the new cabinet secretaries. And in fact, have had cabinet secretaries or their teams proactively reaching out to us and asking for our partnership and our collaboration. So that's been exciting. We have had a number of priorities this year, and I want to give you a rundown on what those priorities are and where they stand currently. And the first big area of priority for us is of course taxes and state revenue. Expanding and front and center in that effort is our work around expanding Maryland's working family tax credits. It's been a standing priority for us since we're founded. We've been part of the fight to expand the earned income tax credit, for example, a number of times. So we were very excited that Governor Moore made the Family Prosperity Act one of his legislative priorities as well. We co-lead the Tax Credits for Maryland Families Coalition with Maryland Cash campaign, with the Cash campaign, and with CASA. And the bill makes the 2021 expansions of the state EITC permanent, increasing the value of the credit for all who are eligible, and also ensuring that immigrant taxpayers can continue to receive the credit. It also expands Maryland's child tax credit, which is woefully tiny, to reach more people and also make it permanent as well. And we expect that will help about 40,000 of the lowest income families with children who they are expected to benefit from the credit. The bill has passed both chambers in the same form. The Senate bill passed the Senate, the House bill passed the House, so they do still have to, one of them has to pass the other's bill, but the two bills are identical, and so we do expect it to gain final passage very soon. We also continue to work with the Maryland Fair Funding Coalition to make our tax system overall more equitable and to raise needed revenue to support public services. While we've had some promising conversations about passing legislation in future years, We don't expect any of those bills to pass this year. There's not seem to be the appetite for it. Another important area for us is in the policy domain of workforce issues. And as part of the leadership of the Time to Care Coalition, we continue to support the effective implementation of the public paid family and medical leave insurance program that the legislature created last year, for example. Legislation under consideration this year will push the timeline back by 1 year so that the Maryland Department of Labor has sufficient time to implement it. Ensure that this would also ensure that employers and employees share equally in the cost. And the bill also clarifies provisions of the 2022 law with some technical amendments. This legislation has passed the Senate and is expected to pass the House. And so that seems to be moving forward. We've also been supporting Governor Moore's bill to speed up the implementation of Maryland's $15 minimum wage. The legislation was amended in the Senate, and unfortunately, now all it does is raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour on January 1st. That is a year earlier than the current schedule for most workers, but the inflation adjustment and the earlier implementation were stripped out, and so we have this somewhat weaker bill, and the House is expected to pass it with the same amendments that the House made. And finally, in the area of workforce, I'll flag that Raquel has put the blog we published recently about the minimum wage in the chat. So, and we'll also send those out afterwards, after the call. The final piece of workforce issues that we're working on, we are in partnership with the National Women's Law Center and the Executive Alliance. We've been leading efforts to build on Maryland's equal pay laws by adapting a salary range transparency requirement. While we built strong support in the first year of this bill, and it's something that is gaining traction in other states, the committee that it is assigned to did not get it passed out in time to meet the crossover deadline by which one chamber has to pass a bill in order to get it automatically considered by the other chamber. So unfortunately, we don't believe it will, the transparency requirement will pass this year, but we'll definitely return to that next year and hope to make have more success in the future. Turning to health issues, we're generally not the lead on health bills, but we have strongly supported our partners' efforts on several key health-related bills. The first is the Access to Care Act. This is a top priority for CASA, and it would allow all Marylanders, regardless of immigration status, to purchase health coverage through the exchange and to receive subsidies if they are eligible. MedSep recently co-hosted a webinar with CASA highlighting this important bill, and it has passed the House. We are still awaiting action in the Senate. And so we'll share the link to that webinar, but we are awaiting action in the Senate. We also are working with our partners on the Trans Health Equity Act, which would expand the types of gender-affirming care that Maryland's Medicaid program covers and make it more in line with other states. This bill has passed both chambers, and so we're excited to be able to mark that success. And finally, in the realm of housing, healthcare, MedSep has supported 2 of Healthcare for All's priority bills that make it easier to enroll in Medicaid and extend the additional insurance subsidies for young Marylanders in order to get more young people enrolled in health coverage. So we're trying to plug the gaps in the state where the areas of the populations in the state that lack healthcare coverage in a couple different ways, as you can see. The final area I would flag before we talk about the budget in in its whole is housing. And MedSep continues to be an active member of Renters United Maryland and support that coalition's priority bills. Two of them have advanced so far. The Tenant Safety Act and a separate bill that requires landlords to be licensed in order to access the court system for evictions. We think those are very important. And also housing is a central issue in the budget. So let's turn to the budget. Where we are in the process. Where are we in the process? So at the moment, the House and Senate have each adopted a budget and are now beginning to negotiate the differences via a conference committee. The legislature has used its new power to add to the budget as well as cut. You may recall this is the first time in 100 years they've been able to do that. This year, for the first time, the governor also has line item veto power, and the legislature can in turn override his veto. Now, Governor Moore and legislative leaders have been trying to work cooperatively on the budget, so we don't necessarily expect any sort of veto fight this year, but it is an option that is out there. The state started the budget season in a historically strong fiscal position. Things are still very good here in Maryland in terms of the state's budget, but federal funds from the American Rescue Plan and other stimulus packages during the pandemic have largely run their course, and the economic growth looks more uncertain. In fact, earlier this month, state analysts actually lowered the revenue estimates for the next budget year by $400 million. So that means that a lot of new priorities that we started the session thinking would potentially be able to be funded didn't get funded. The big picture, though, is despite that, this budget still does a lot of really great things. It includes money to support the EITC and child tax credit expansion. It sets aside significant one-time funding to fund future years of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future around education. There are raises that pay for state employees to help raises for state employees, and that will help address the staffing crisis that's affecting state agencies, and I think is one of the reasons why we've had to push back some of the policies we've been talking about, push their implementation back by a year. The one thing, unfortunately, that is not in this budget that we are most concerned about is additional funds for emergency rental assistance. Local governments have largely run through their emergency funds. There had been a lot of federal dollars. All those federal dollars have gone away. And so now some jurisdictions are already starting to see a corresponding spike in evictions. And we expect that spike in evictions to spread throughout the state, absent the state stepping up. So the latest ask is for the governor and legislature to put in a little less in the rainy day fund, our Maryland savings account, essentially. Our rainy day fund is funded at historically high levels. And so we're asking the governor to put a little bit and the legislature to put a little bit less in that rainy day fund to help Maryland families keep a roof over their heads. So that's our big budget ask that's still outstanding, and where the other bills that we've been working on kind of stand. And with that, I will close my remarks, and we are happy to take questions through, I guess we're doing this in webinar style. So please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box would also work. And we will do our best to answer them. Or perhaps I answered all your questions and covered everything in great detail, and we've got everything covered. Not seeing anything come through yet. Oh, okay, I see a question coming through. Let me see from Kevin. It was the minimum wage, but Callie, do you want to answer Kevin's question about where there's no movement in the Senate and if there might be particular senators to target?
So it was not the minimum wage bill. The minimum wage bill has passed the Senate, but has not passed in the House yet. It's kind of the path that we expected for that. So we do expect that to move through the House with the amendments that the Senate made. There's a hearing, the crossover hearing is next week for minimum wage. I believe it was the Access to Care Act that Ben mentioned. And I just got to note that if we could repeat the questions that they can't see them. The question was whether we could name the senators that are on the committees that need some attention. So yeah, the Access to Care Act, which is CASA's priority bill. Is I don't necessarily, since they're more deep in the negotiations, I don't necessarily want to speak for them on who needs pressure, but I think generally reaching out to your legislators or legislators you have a relationship with who is helpful, and that bill goes through the Senate Finance Committee. So particularly if you have relationships with anyone on the Senate Finance Committee, hearing support for that bill, which is the bill that expands, that allows people to purchase health coverage through the exchange regardless of immigration status.
Thanks. We did also get a question, and I'm trying to look this bill number up because I don't actually know, but Leslie asked what the status of SB 201 is, and I guess this is around school-based Medicaid legislation. Does that ring a bell for you, Callie? It looks like I got a hearing in the Senate, but hasn't moved in the Senate since.
Yes. So that is not a bill we worked on, but I have heard a little bit about it. This is about reimbursing school districts for providing behavioral health services. So it's, the goal, I think, was providing additional support for behavioral health services in schools. And I believe, so it has not moved on either side. Looking at the fiscal note, I suspect it's because of the cost involved. As Ben was saying, once the budget, the revenue estimates were written down by 400 million, they kind of put a halt on any new programs that had significant spending attached to it. So I don't know that for certain, but that's my best guess on why that bill has not moved.
The next question was around the housing bills that are being considered this year. And so there's two bills that are moving. Well, so there's three housing issues essentially. So we're trying to get money back in the budget bill, as I mentioned, for emergency rental assistance. And then the Tenant Safety Act is moving. And there's a bill that would require landlords to be licensed in order to access the court system for eviction. So, for example, here in Baltimore City, if your landlord, I think it's over a certain size, you have to be licensed, but maybe I might be wrong on that. It might be every landlord, but you shouldn't be able to evict people if you're operating illegally as a landlord, is essentially the idea. And so we want landlords to comply with the law before they access the legal system to implement evictions. And
then, yeah, I can say a little bit more about the Tenant Safety Act. So this essentially allows tenants who, if there's an issue in the common area of the building, like that is unsafe, or like there's unsafe conditions in a building affecting multiple tenants, it allows them to file action together, so that, right now the process, if you have an issue in your apartment, you can put rent in escrow until your landlord fixes the issue. But if there's an issue in the building, each individual tenant has to do that. So this sets up a process for them to work collectively to fix common issues that are affecting multiple tenants.
And the next question was around why is implementation of the Paid Family Leave Act being delayed? So Kelly, do you want to answer that too?
Yes. And yeah, I think we all want to see people be able to get benefits as quickly as possible. However, we also recognize that the Department of Labor needs time to set up the infrastructure. And essentially, because the Hogan administration opposed the bill and because they were on their way out, not much happened since the bill passed last year to get that work started. So we have a new Secretary of Labor who's really committed to implementing it and doing this right, but asked for more time because they have to write regulations and get those approved. They have to set up computer systems. They have to hire staff. And then there's about a year buildup, a little over a year between when collections start, when payroll deductions will come out to help fund the program before it starts paying out benefits. So those are the two steps those are kind of the steps that need to happen before people can start receiving benefits. So yeah, it is disappointing, particularly to have to delay when people start receiving benefits, because we know people need this now and yesterday. But we also want to make sure that it's implemented correctly and not rushed, so that it works when once it launches.
I think when this has been implemented in other states, they've had similar processes of delay to get it started as well. So this is not super unusual, although it's unfortunate that the previous administration didn't do much to try and get the ball rolling. So I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat or the Q&A. So last call for questions. We really appreciate everyone's support and interest in the work that we're doing together to promote broad prosperity across the state, and really look forward to continuing to partner with each of you on this important work. And as I said, we've recorded this, so we will send out to this more limited group a copy of the recording and any materials that we linked in the chat. We'll send a link again. But not seeing any other questions, I just will say thank you so much for spending part of your lunch hour with us, and we hope that you have a good weekend, and we'll finish out the session strong. This legislative session ends April 10th, I believe, 10th or 11th, 10th. So just a few weeks left. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your Friday.